Dragon decks have notoriously been expensive to brew and build. Just look at the Dragon being $75 right now. For a lot of players, a dragon-themed deck is what they want, but it's out of reach. But what if I told you that didn't have to be the case? This week's Build Your Own Precon is a $45 budget Miirym Sentinel Wyrm dragon-themed deck packed with your favorite flying monsters. That's right, this blue, green, and red deck features over 20 dragons to form a massive army in the sky. The box legend for Dragon Disaster is Miirym Sentinel Wyrm. Despite being an EDH Rec top 10 commander, this beauty is under $1 right now and perfect for what we want to do. Right away, Miirym is a 6-mana 6/6 flyer with Ward 2, making spells and abilities that target her cost 2 more to cast. But notably, whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under our control, we make a non-legendary copy of it. That takes the dragons in our deck from over 20 to possibly over 40, including all of the copies. This is right up my alley since I love making copies of cards, and Miirym can do that in a few sneaky ways. Note that the ability isn't a cast ability like a Volo Guide to Monsters or Tawnos the Toymaker. Since it's an enters the battlefield effect, we could be blinking some of our dragons for extra copies, in some cases for just a single mana. Before we look at all of the crazy dragons included in this brew, be sure to hit all the good buttons below, and let me know in the comments if you want to see more of these budget and beginner-friendly decks. The biggest question is, of course, what dragons can we fit in a budget brew? If cards like Utvara Hellkite and Terror of the Peaks are prohibitively expensive, can we actually afford good dragons? Of course we can. Recent releases like Battle for Baldur's Gate have given us smaller, low-to-the-ground dragons that provide us real benefits. Dragons under 5 mana like Corlessa Scalesinger, allowing us to cast dragons from the top of our library, to Patron of the Arts, helping ramp us to bigger threats, and Draconic Muralists, acting as a tutor for some of our big, beefy threats. This utility gives us the reach that we didn't have for this archetype just a year ago. But little guys aren't what people want to play dragons for. No, they want big bombs. In this brew, it's some of the legendary dragons Miirym can make us copies of, like Furcag Cunning Instigator, helping goad opponents' creatures and protecting us while we fly in uncontested. Or Ganax Astral Hunter, who makes us treasures when dragons enter the battlefield, meaning the copies Miirym makes ramp us as well. Or Keiga the Tidestar, stealing an opponent's creature if it ever dies. Each of these dragons has a use on their own and only gets better if we can make more copies of them, taking triggered effects and doubling them up. But let's not neglect the very top of our curve. Red Dragon dealing 4 damage to each opponent on enters the battlefield, or 8 if we get a copy of it. Steel Hellkite helping us fly through and take out opponents' tokens or other permanents when we pay extra mana for the triggers. If we have 2 copies, that's twice as many triggers. And the biggest of them all, Earthquake Dragon, a massive 10/10 flying trampler that can potentially be cast for just a single green mana if we have 14 power worth of dragons out. Casting these big dragons isn't the only way to make copies though. We've got a few blink spells in the list, like Teferi's Time Twist and Planar Incision. Miirym's ability, along with a few of the other cards in the deck, trigger when a dragon enters the battlefield rather than cast, meaning blinking can get us extra damage, extra cards, and extra dragons for just a mana or 2. This is an area of the deck that can be expanded pretty significantly. We'll take a look at that in the upgrade section. These dragons are all scary on their own, but we have synergies to make them even scarier. From Crucible of Fire giving even our smallest dragons +2/+2, through to Dragon's Fire being one of our best targeted removal spells, to a heavy hitter in the deck like the unassuming Dragon Tempest, giving our flying dragons haste and throwing around damage equal to the number of dragons we control when a dragon enters the battlefield, token, copy, or otherwise. This one enchantment helps our deck go from scary to terrifying. Now, looking at the list, you may notice there's not a lot of ramp that fits into our $45 budget. So instead of focusing on land-based ramp, we're focusing on discounting the cost of our dragons. This helps us potentially cast multiple dragons a turn. Remember that discounting the cost of your spells is better than getting extra mana if you plan on casting more than 1 spell a turn. So we have a Dragonlord Servant, Dragon Speaker Shaman, and Acolyte of Bahamut background in the list, all working to reduce the cost of our dragons down to just 1 to 2 mana ideally. This means we could be casting a 6-power dragon for just 2 mana, and getting 2 copies of it. But we do have some traditional ramp in the list, as best as we can fit on a budget at least. From Rampant Growth to Migration Path to Traverse the Outlands, there's no doubt that once we land a dragon or 2 on the battlefield, we can quickly snowball to having more mana than we'll ever need in later turns. We also have all of the dragon orbs in the deck: Carnelian, Jade, and Lapis. These 3 mana rocks not only make us mana, but also provide a benefit if we use that mana to cast dragon spells. From giving them haste, to giving them counters, to just scrying. These are all great budget-efficient rocks that help our core synergies. Now, one of the other issues in decks that focus on dragons is card draw. How do we keep our hands full? How do we recover from board wipes? Well, for card draw, we'll be focusing on our big beefy boys. Colossal Majesty and Garruk's Uprising both focus on drawing us cards based on having big creatures. Uprising in particular doubling up on card draw when we have 4+ power dragons enter the battlefield. But I've also found room in the budget for the amazing Kindred Discovery. This 5 mana enchantment draws us a card whenever a dragon enters the battlefield. Again, not caring if it's a token or not. And draws us a card when we attack with a dragon. This can result in drawing 4 or more cards a turn easily, and on its own ensure that we're never running out of gas. One of the biggest concerns with traditional pre-constructed decks is that the mana bases get more and more difficult to manage as you add more and more colors. That's a very valid concern. The better lands cost, in some cases, as much as this deck's entire $45 budget. But for this brew, I've found some great, inexpensive lands that do exactly what we want them to do and don't slow us down. For a creature type based deck, lands like Path of Ancestry, Secluded Courtyard, and Unclaimed Territory are perfect ways to create all of our colors of manas for dragons. They won't help us cast non-dragon spells, but most of our non-dragon spells cost only 1 to 2 colored mana anyway. The Pain lands, Yavimaya Coast, Shivan Reef, and Carplusian Forest, are all very inexpensive includes for lands that make colors when we want them and colorless mana when we don't. Lots of players shy away from paying life for mana over the course of the game, but these lands should be auto-includes in just about every deck that features 3 or more colors of mana. And of course, I would have loved to have included the battle lands in this brew too, but until they're reprinted in each and every official precon, they just won't reach the prices that make them budget friendly. A shame because our format is the only place where they're really playable. For the pivot build of this precon, I've included Intet the Dreamer. This legendary dragon is another 6 mana 6/6 flyer, though much more active with incentive to attack. See, on dealing combat damage to an opponent, you can pay 2 colorless and a blue to exile the top card of your library, choosing to cast it without paying its mana cost whenever you want. This makes for a much more interesting pivot, where you want to be including more expensive spells in your deck. Be the massive bombs like Omniscience, or massive dragons like Drakuseth Maw of Flame. If we're pivoting to Intet, we may also want to include some more manipulation for the top of our library to make sure we're hitting something good. There are expensive options for this like Sensei's Divining Top and Sylvan Library, but we could also be including Brainstorm and Telling Time and Dream Cache to make sure what we exile with our commander is worth casting for free. Paying 3 mana to cast 7 or more mana worth of spells is really good, especially if you can do it reliably every turn. Now for the upgrade. There are certainly a lot of cards we could include in the deck. If I were to add $50, we could be adding a single Terror of the Peaks, or we could make some real additions to the list. Temur Ascendancy is a good start. Another way to give our dragons haste, and a draw engine similar to Garruk's Uprising. This helps us draw multiple cards when our commander is out and keeps us filled with gas all game long. On that same note, Dragonborn Champion is a dragon and a draw engine for when we deal 5 or more damage to an opponent. If we have 2 copies of this guy out, then every dragon that connects for 5 damage draws us 2 cards. That drowns the board in aggro and advantage fast. If we're making copies of our other dragons, then making copies of our commander starts going really crazy. I'm a big fan of cloning Miirym with a Spark Double or a Sakashima of 1,000 Faces, but even just including an Irenicus's Vile duplication to get even one extra copy of Miirym is so good. Getting 3, 4, or 5 dragons each time one enters the battlefield? That makes the game move so fast. We could be adjusting the deck a bit to focus on blinking our dragons for extra copies. Thassa Deep Dwelling can do this for us on each of our turns, but she's currently $20 and would eat up a large part of our extra budget. Conjurer's Closet, on the other hand, is just a couple of bucks, and can help us go into Dragon Overload very fast. Adding in Ghostly Flicker or Essence Flux or Blur are also great ways to pay just a couple of mana for bonus copies of our scaly aggressors. There's an entire Blink and Clone deck you could build with this list as a basis, I'm certain of it. But let me know what you think of this brew, and if you feel the $45 price point means that you can still build a very aggressive, very good dragon-themed deck. Be sure to check out the channel's previous Build Your Own precons, as well as my tune-ups for official precons as well. Before you leave, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and, as always, good luck and have fun.